to another episode of Wiggy Reviews. Today I'm going to be reviewing a romance novel to continue from my last episode, which was released on Valentine's Day, with a romantic novel. Anyways, so we're gonna go straight into the actual romance genre, and today I will be reviewing Dark Lover by J.R. Ward. Alright, so Dark Lover by J.R. Ward is the first in her Black Dagger Brotherhood, where currently there are 12 books out now, and I'm just going to read you a quick synopsis of it, so here we go. So, the only purebred vampire left on the planet and the leader of the Black Dagger Brotherhood, Wrath, has a score to settle with the slayers who killed his parents a century ago. But when his most trusted fighter is killed, orphaning a half-breed daughter unaware of her heritage or her fate, Wrath must put down his dagger and usher the beautiful female into another world. Racked by a restlessness in her body that wasn't there before, Beth Randall is helpless against the dangerously sexy man who comes to her at night with shadows in his eyes. His tales of the Brotherhood and blood frighten her, yet his touch ignites a dawning new hunger, one that threatens to consume them both. Now, if you couldn't tell from that, there are two things about this series you should know. One, it is a romance series. And two, it is about vampires. So a romance series about vampires. And you're probably thinking, well, why don't I just read Twilight if I'm going to be that? Because Twilight is for teenagers and this is for adults. So, anyways, so let's just keep going. So main characters are Beth and Wrath. Wrath is the vampire, Beth is the half-breed that he falls in love with, or lust with, in the beginning. And I will say that, you know, their chemistry is, as in a lot of romance stories, quick and unrealistic. But, you know, it's romance. They're allowed to get away with that because that's fantasy, romantic fantasy. So I'm gonna get all of the bad things out of the way first, and then we will go into the good things, and through that I'll go through the entire book. So, bad things. You can tell this is a first book in a series by an author, and you can tell that, you know, she was just playing around with the writing, because there are a lot of cliches, and I use that term very broadly. There's a lot of cliched characters, a lot of cliched, I'm gonna say costumes, but that's, you know, a lot of cliched imagery, I guess, and a lot of cliched dialogue. So, you know, there were times in the story where I was taken out because of that, and I had a nice little laugh, like, so I'll go through each of those. The cliched characters, you know, there's the cop on the edge who barely follows the rules. There's the married cop that's a friend that, oh, he's married, we would have been amazing together if he wasn't married. Then there's the sleazy boss. There's the overly violent vampires, I guess, I don't know. And then there is, you know, the rich boy raping people, who can get away with it because his father is the governor and can get him out of it, you know, that kind of stuff. And that's just for the characters. And then for the imagery, there's a lot of leather in this. Like, all the vampires are dressed in leather. They're like decked out with weapons. Like, they got like ninja stars and swords and guns and all these weapons, and they're just walking around with that. And it's it makes me think of the Matrix. Like the costume, like it would be like the same costume designer for the Matrix just was like, leather, everybody should wear leather is great. So that always makes me laugh a little bit, because it's like, you know, how can they be sneaking around when they're squeak, squeak, squeak every time they walk? So that kind of, you know, that image, I could get over that though. That wasn't too bad. And then some of the dialogue, God, it was just, the one that sticks out the most for me is just that one that, you know, is like, if you want to get to him, you've got to go through me. You know, like that kind of stuff, that kind of cliched writing where you're like, oh God, I'm not a creative brain cell in the brain. But, you know, at the same time, I can understand this was a first book. This was her trying out the characters, how they talk. She's still figuring them out. And luckily, the good things actually outweighed the bad things and actually made the story a little, you know, actually interesting for me. So let's get into the good things. The vampire mythology, like, and you know, anytime someone writes a book about vampires, you are always wondering, like, are they gonna change things? Are they gonna change it for the good? Are they gonna change it for bad? Like sparkling vampires. And I feel that J.R. Ward actually did very well adding her own mythology to it. They still can't go out in the sun. They drink blood, but it's a little more complicated. Like, they drink blood from humans, but really they also need to drink from each other to get better energy. And that's an interesting concept, an interesting idea that they've played on, that other writers have played on, like Anne Rice has played on that as well. And then, like, I'm gonna have to mention a bad thing for this too, but I mean, even, like, all the vampires were interesting characters. Like, all of them were very interesting characters, and they had their own little things. Like, each of them had, like, a special thing about them or a curse about them, and it was interesting to see, like, oh, vampires can have curses, and they have, each of them are, like, special in some way. The only thing that bothered me about them is their names. Like, some of the names are Torment, Vicious, Rage, Fury, Sadist, and all that. And it wasn't that it was those names were bothering me because they were those names, is because she chose to spell them differently to make it not seem like they were those words, you know, like adding a twist to them. And it just kind of, it took me forever to realize that vicious was vicious. I was like, who's vicious? And then, like, sadist, I was like, oh, it's Zadist, because there's a Z, and I was like, so that kind of took me out a little bit. But again, each of them were their own person, they were their own character, and she wrote each of them very well, so I could tell who was who, and they were talking, so she gave them their own voice, which is always fantastic for a writer to do. And another thing for the mythology is Wrath. He is the king of vampires, and you know, and that could be stupid. like you know, that could lead to something not interesting and not intriguing to read about. But she actually made his backstory and his lineage and all that an actual interesting idea and something that actually could possibly be. And I appreciate that. And then the enemy that they are fighting against, because it's not just humans that they're going against, you know, like a vampire hunter of humans. They're also going against this kind of opposing society called the Lessening Society, which gathers humans and turns them into lessers. Basically, they, if I remember correctly, they lose their soul and they become immortals, but they kind of become vampires without the vampirism. Like, they can still go out in the day, but they can't have, like, she'd like to really emphasize they could not have sex, and I don't really understand why. It was something to the effect like, oh, they don't have blood pumping through them, and it's like, well, no, they're vampires, but we're not gonna get into that. But the way the society was written was very nice, and it was an intriguing idea, like, oh, they have these undead people coming after them, undead fighting the undead. So that was a nice kind of different thing to see, instead of like just having, you know, oh, werewolves, vampires, they hate each other, blah, blah, blah. Like, it's actually bringing in something intriguing and new. And like I said, there are still some bad things in it, and the good things that outweigh them luckily did way more. Like, the story was at its core interesting. It was an interesting story, and you know, like the whole, she's a half-breed and she needs someone to help her through it or else she could die. And she doesn't realize it until they tell her. So that was an interesting, like, little twist to it. And, you know, like I said, the characters that worked well. Like, for all the cliched characters that there were, the most interesting people were the vampires, the Brotherhood. So I'm just gonna go ahead and get to my scoring. Overall, story was nice. Characters that worked. The cliches were a little distracting and did take me out of the story. And, you know, the whole image of leather, I think, is past its prime. You know, when I imagine it, all I can imagine is a squeaky sofa when you sit in it. So I have to give this book overall a score of 5 out of 10. Like, you know, it was enjoyable. I enjoyed it. I did like reading it. And I haven't even gotten into the sex scenes yet. Like, they were all over the place too. And you know, they were sex scenes, you know? I don't know how else to review them. You know, there's no real way to really review them except for the fact, like, did it take me out? Was it just kind of odd that it happened? Like, was it too, like, shocking? And for this, it wasn't too shocking, because, you know, going into it, I knew I was expecting it, because it's a romance series about vampires, and, you know, everyone thinks sex when they think vampires. So again, 5 out of 10. If you're very curious, I say go ahead and read it. It's a fun read, and I laughed out loud for the cliches. And you know, it makes me think, like, this book is now it has a 12th book out, so I'm very interested to see where she took the story and where her characters evolved and how they grew, and also to see how her writing style has changed, because, you know, as an author, your writing style changes over the years. So I would actually be interested in reading some of her later works and just comparing and seeing how she found her own voice as a writer. So again, 5 out of 10. And I guess that's it. I will see you next time for Wiggy reviews, and it'll probably be another romance. It might not. It'll be a surprise for you and me. So have a good day, and I will see you next time.